So we got to hit our tomatoes while we can. We got to get as much out of those plants while they're still around. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Tuesday, May 7th here in South Georgia, and it's time for our weekly tomato discussion. So on today's video, we're going to talk about what we need to do with our tomato plants this week, feeding wise, trellising wise, and take care of those things. Then we're going to jump on over to the raised beds. We got some peppers over there that need trellising, show you how we do that. And then we're going to see if those purple tomatoes we planted a long time ago in the greenhouse are ever going to be ready to transplant. So just in case you haven't been following along, 2 weeks ago we gave all our tomato plants a little bit of that and a little bit of that. Just mixed both of them up in a 5-gallon bucket and poured some alongside each plant. We also healed all these plants, which basically means we pulled some soil up around the base of the plants. And 2 weeks ago we also replaced the runt plant that was here with another plant. That's why that one there doesn't look near as good as the rest of them. So that was 2 weeks ago. Shortly after we did that feeding and that healing, all our tomato plants pretty much doubled or tripled in size. And then last week we put these cages over the top of our indeterminate tomato plants. We talked about why maybe this one here is looking so terrible. And then we also set up the Florida weave trellis for our determinate tomatoes and ran our first line of string. So we fed and healed these 2 weeks ago. We set up our trellis 1 week ago, and today we need to do a little bit of both. Now 2 weeks ago when we fed these for the first time, I told you how tomatoes are one of those plants that like to be spoon fed, which means instead of giving them a bunch of fertilizer all at one time, they like to be fed in frequent intervals, say for instance every couple weeks. And if I wanted to, I might could get away with feeding these things every single week. You got to think, we're growing mostly determinate tomatoes here. These things have a pretty fast maturity date. We also have a really short tomato growing season down here in South Georgia. We're usually done by mid-July. So we got to hit our tomatoes while we can. We got to get as much out of those plants while they're still around. And then if you recall on our video last week when we set up this Florida weave trellis, I told you my 5 rules for a really good Florida weave trellis system. And one of those rules was staying on top of things, adding a new line of string every single week. These plants have grown a ton since the last time we were out here, so we definitely got to add another line of string this week. Now before we mix our concoction in the bucket and feed these tomato plants, I want to show you something real quick that I recently got that I'm really liking. So many of you know that our water spigot is over there by the house, and we just move this water hose around to each of these different plots to feed the drip system or the overhead sprinkler in each plot. So we're constantly moving this water hose around, and sometimes I'll feel like going over there and turning the water off, unhooking it, hooking it up to another plot, turning the water back on. Other times I would just kink the hose and unhook it, but after a while you kink a hose so many times it kind of wears it out. So what I recently acquired was this little shut-off valve here that I really like. So I had bought one of these in the past. It was a Dram brand and it was all brass. It looked really nice and fancy, but it restricted the flow way too much, and I don't know what I did with it. I may have thrown the thing away. It looked nice, but I didn't like it at all. This one here, which I recently got off Drip Depot, looks like the brand is called Tempo or something like that. This was made out of plastic. It doesn't look near as fancy as the Dram one I had, but it works so much better. It doesn't restrict the flow at all, and you can kind of halfway turn it on, get a nice little spray going, or just turn it on all the way like that. So been really liking this thing. It has saved me some time, also going to save my water hose. So just like we did a couple weeks ago, we're going to put some of this Agri-Thrive fruit and flower in our bucket. Not going to measure, just a few little glugs like that. And then going to put some of this beneficial bacteria solution in there, this Bug Hut plant booster. We do have both of these on our website if you want to give them a try. Got both of those in there. Now we're just going to fill it up with water and get it mixed around good. Okay, so here's our concoction. Now for these determinate plants, the first time we fed these, they weren't near this big, and we poured this concoction around the base of the plant. That's a little harder to do now because these plants are so big and bushy. So what I'm going to do instead is work between these plants. I know the root system of each of these plants is connecting pretty much there between the plants. And so what we're going to do here is pour about a half a scoop between the two plants. Just like that. And they should be able to access it. And that's going to keep us from washing down our hill that we have around each plant. And for these indeterminates, it's kind of hard to get my picture inside that cage there. So what I'm going to do, because I know the tomatoes have roots outside of where that cage sits, I'm just going to pour my fertilizer, just lightly drizzle it right around the outside of that cage. All right, so we got all our determinates fed and all our indeterminates fed, except for this one right here. I didn't really feel like it was necessary to fertilize this oxheart tomato plant that's looking so terrible. It's not looking terrible because it needs some fertilizer, and it looks like it's on the way out, so I just didn't even feed it at all. We'll probably pull it up here in the next week. Now as far as trellising goes, there's not a whole lot to do with these indeterminates in the cages. I do come out here about once a week and kind of make sure these branches are on the right rung of the ladder or the cage. Just make sure I spread them out a little bit so we have some decent airflow between the plants. Besides that, we're just letting these puppies grow. We're not going to prune them at all. We're just going to let them go, and we'll get as many tomatoes as we can get out of here before the heat or viral pressure or disease pressure, whatever is out. And then back over here on our determinate row, we need to add one more line of string for our Florida weave trellis. So we got our box of twine there. We'll weave that string in between all those plants down the row and back this way. Every time we get to a post, we'll wrap it around a few times. All right, so that's what it looks like with the second line of string ran on our Florida weave. While we can, while these plants are still small and not super bushy, we try to get that string right up on the main stem of the tomato plant. Once they get larger, that becomes almost impossible, but we try to do it while we can. You can see our two lines of string there are probably about, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches apart. If you wanted to be extra cautious with this, we could have ran 2 lines of string there instead of just 1. So like I told you last week, no such thing as having too many lines of string on your Florida weave trellis, but if you don't have enough, that thing can collapse on you down the road. Now over here we need to do the Florida weave as well, but in a raised bed and for peppers, not tomatoes. Most of these pepper plants are looking pretty decent. That one right there looks like it's got a little bit of a funk going on. Not sure if we can push it out of it or if it's going to be doomed, but I'm not ready to pull that plant quite yet. So I'm going to steal a few of those T-posts amongst those toasty English peas, and we can use those for our raised bed peppers. All right, so we got our 4 T-posts installed there. Had to drive those down good enough to get into the native soil for them to stick. Otherwise, they're kind of loose in this raised bed soil. Now, with tomatoes, like I told you, we don't want to put more than 4 tomato plants between the posts because they can start to sag and lean when the plants get bigger. Pepper plants don't get near as heavy as tomato plants, so we don't have to worry about that as much here. I don't know what the limit is as far as how many pepper plants we can get away with between posts, but I know we'll be safe with 5 here. So same exact thing we did with the tomatoes. We got our box of twine here. We're going to start by tying around this post. We'll weave through the plants and then come back. And there we go, raised bed weave initiated and completed in just a matter of minutes there. Now this can get a little bit tricky if you've got a bunch of different pepper varieties planted in one bed like we do here. Some varieties going to get a lot taller than others, so we just go by our shortest plant, and when it needs more string, then we add more string to all of them. Pepper plants aren't near as heavy as tomato plants, so we don't have to be on top of our game as much with these, but we do want to keep these plants supported. And now, as promised, the last thing I want to show you or talk to you about today are these purple tomato transplants. So you probably can't see it on camera, but even the roots on these things are purple. They're kind of crazy looking. So I very well could have missed the window on getting these planted, but I've just been waiting and waiting and waiting to have a nice viable transplant. I think we're almost there. We can probably get away with transplanting these now, but it has taken a long time to get to this point. So besides my hypothesis that these purple tomato seeds just don't have any vigor, I don't have any idea why these things won't respond to my fertilization plan just like everything else in the greenhouse does. We've been trying to push these things hard. They just won't grow. I mean, they've grown a little bit, but if this was a normal tomato variety, it would be 4 or 5 times this size now. And I know a lot of other people have struggled with getting these things up and going, but there are some that swear they got all their seeds to germinate and they got some beautiful looking purple tomato plants. Now in the marketing world, we have these things called cheerleaders, or at least that's what I call them. So people that are paid to go around and leave good reviews on stuff. Now I know that sounds a little conspiracy theorist, but I know for a fact that it happens across a wide range of industries, and I'm beginning to think the people that say they've got 100% germination on these and their plants look great are getting paid to tell people that. Because although my seed starting methods aren't perfect, I don't get 100% all the time, every time, but if we can get seedless watermelons to germinate at a decent rate, we ought to be able to get these to germinate and grow at a decent rate. So until I see it with my own eyes and somebody proves me otherwise, I'm going to call baloney on these things right here. Now we're going to plant them. I got to cut some cabbage in one of those other raised beds, make some room. I'm going to plant these within the next week, but my expectations for them are not very high at this point. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and if you bought some of those purple tomato seeds and are not a paid cheerleader for that company, let me know in the comments below how they're doing for you. And if you missed that video where we talked about the importance of healing tomato plants and how we got ours to double in size, you can watch that right here. We'll show you the entire process. So check that out. We'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.